Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average decklist as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. In this installment, we've got a commander who definitely proves that the best offense is a good defense. Arcades the Strategist is a 4-mana flying and vigilant 3/5 Bont commander who embodies Defender Tribal. He makes all of our Defender creatures able to deal damage with their toughness rather than their power, and also removes their restriction that normally prevents them from being able to attack. And as if that wasn't enough, whenever a Defender enters our battlefield, we'll draw a card. Looking at his page is like talking to a wall. That's a lot of Defenders, and they have some really great abilities when they start to build up. I wonder which one of those Humpty Dumpty fell off of. Hope he's doing okay. Let's go ahead and see what Arcades is up to by taking his list from the average deck feature and importing it to the Architect deck building website. As always, the swaps we make must either be cost neutral or help lower the price of the overall list. Seeing this many walls makes me want to do parkour. Arcades' setup honestly reminds me a bit of another Bont commander, Tulane, although Arcades is not as problematically unhinged as Tulane is. But the sentiment is similar. Pack the deck with a ton of tiny creatures, play them over and over and over again to keep our hand full, and overall, it's just a recipe for success. Even by building up for just a few turns, a teeny tiny push will cause our structures to topple over our enemies. Still, there are some cracks in the wall that I think we can patch up. Normally, we'd have 3 sections in these videos, but for this one, we'll only need 2. Brick and mortar. Our bricks will be our Defender creatures, and our mortar are going to be all the other cards that help support them. But since a wall can only be built from the ground up, we're actually going to start by mixing the mortar first. So this is one of those videos where I'm sad that I can only explain things in chronological order, if that makes any sense. Basically, all of these changes are interdependent. The swaps that I make at the beginning also kind of explain the rationale between changes that I make at the end, and vice versa. But I can't make them all at once. I have to explain things one by one. Just keep in mind that, like a brick wall, all of these pieces are interlocked. Basically, this first section addresses the non-creature cards I want to add, the stuff between the creatures that helps glue them together and make everything stick. I want to start by addressing some specific holes in the wall, especially where I spot cards with missing counterparts. We have one pair of shoes here, for instance, but not the other. Arcades is a linchpin to this deck's functionality, simultaneously being our card advantage engine and our lethal attack enabler, so he definitely needs to be protected. Let's get the second set of battle boots in here. We also have a Cultivate, but curiously no Kodama's Reach. Now, at first, I was fully committed to plugging that hole and getting Kodama's Reach into this deck. However, I'm actually going to end up doing the opposite and cut the Cultivate. Blasphemy, I know, but hear me out. I'm exchanging it for 2-mana ramp, and I'll get to what the replacement is in a second, but I want to linger on this 3-mana ramp discussion for a bit because I think it's really, really interesting. And more importantly, it will lay the groundwork for a greater discussion on how this specific commander works, which is a point we're going to hit on a couple of times in this video. So to be clear, I'm not trading out a 3-mana ramp spell to a 2-mana ramp spell just for the sake of general efficiency. Kodama's and Cultivate are bonkers good spells. I would not make this recommendation to exchange either of them for a 2-mana ramp effect in just any deck. Arcades himself is what adds this specific wrinkle. First, there's the obvious fact that Arcades is 4 mana. A ramp effect on turn 2 gives us access to 4 mana to cast him on turn 3. Now, I'm sure we've all heard a justification like that before, so I want to pause again here and state that I don't think a 4-mana cost on a commander is alone enough to justify a change to 2-mana ramp. A commander like Atraxa, for instance, or Marin, are not necessarily the kind that you ramp out onto the battlefield ASAP. Putting a bunch of 2-mana ramp into their decks to get them out on turn 3 wouldn't yield a whole bunch of value because you probably wouldn't yet have a counter to proliferate at that time, or a creature to get back from the yard. Atla Palani is also 4 mana, and as quickly as I want to be making eggs with her, Cultivate and Kodama's Reach are showing up very highly in her deck for dang good reasons, because she's got some big cards coming down the pike that those spells will help us attain. The additional consistency of those 3-mana ramp spells is more valuable to her than just the speed of 2-mana ramp. So 2-mana ramp is not an innate characteristic required for 4-mana commanders, but it is for Arcades. Arcades does want to get out ASAP, because his reward flows the literal turn after we play him. The faster we cast him, the faster we start drawing cards from his ability. Speed is a game he can play, and one we should try to help him win. I get that this is kind of a lot of discussion about just like one ramp spell, but this theme will come up again later in the video. So for now, just keep it in your noggin that a low curve is very important for this deck. In any case, I'm cutting the 3-mana ramp spell and I'm adding in Arcane Signet, since it doesn't appear to be here yet. I'd also be interested in adding literally any of these cards to the deck too, but they're all like $4 at a minimum, which is a bit of a bummer. So I'll go with a Sakura Tribe Elder instead, because it is a sensible price. It feels weird to add a non-defender to this deck, but we can't beat that price when the other 2-mana ramp options are creeping up in the dollars like that. Keep those other cards in mind if you want to start making cool upgrades to this deck though. Now, the Tribe Elder has me thinking about other non-defenders, and this is where I start making some cuts, cause like, I've got 3 I'm making here, and I don't have anything nice to say about them. Mentor of the Meek, Towering Titan, and Charix. Mentor of the Meek is gesturing towards something interesting here. Like, the synergy is there, but here's the fun part. We don't actually need it. Arcades is a stellar engine unto himself. We don't need to pay the extra mana here, especially when we could be playing more defenders instead. I like the idea of this one, but it turns out to be unnecessary. As for the Giant, I can't with this one. If you've listened to Ruben Bressler of Magic Mike's fame, he has an Arcades deck and he listed this card as one of the top 10 worst mythics of 2020. And I don't disagree. Do we want to pay 6 mana for a creature that will not draw us a card, which requires us to already be doing well to be even remotely powerful, and which will sacrifice our creatures to make them better at something we'll soon find out they don't need any help with? The answer is no. Then there's Charix. Okay, I lied earlier when I said I don't have anything nice to say about these cards, because I actually do have nice things to say about Charix as a card in general. However, I do not have nice things to say about Charix in this deck. This card does not have Defender. It is a 4-mana card with a lot of toughness, but no Defender. Big strike against it. Now, to be fair, our deck also contains Arcades' backup plans like Assault Formation and High Alert, but those are not enough to save Charix here. This is a 4-mana creature that does not draw us a card and cannot benefit us meaningfully in battle until we find one of the enchantments that is supposed to serve as our backup plan? No, sir. I do not like playing cards that only synergize with our backup plans. Sorry, Charix, but there will be no Carsonization in this deck. Oh, and P.S., since I have them on screen, did you know that Arcades has infinite combos in his deck? Yeah, this mana-producing defender right here can get untapped by High Alert and go totally ham. Alright, now here's the part where I blow the minds of people who aren't as familiar with Arcades as a deck. Another reason I cut some of those cards is because their mana cost is too high. Seriously, here's the average mana curve of an Atraxa deck, which is a fairly typical speed for Commander games. Now here is the average mana curve for Arcades. Check out how insane that difference is. I'll speak more on the nature of our mana curve as it relates to our creatures in section 2, but for now I'll simply ask to keep it in mind that our deck's curve is far lower than other decks out there. Thus, I'll finish up this section by addressing some other cards that also have a high mana cost and thus won't be making the final cut. Angelic Chorus is the first, and Sight of the Scale Lords is the second. 5 mana is quite literally the top of our curve, and while Angelic Chorus can gain us lots of life, we don't really need that. It's nice, but it deviates just slightly off of our mission. Sight of the Scale Lords is much nicer, and it fits right in with our strategy on the whole. I almost kept it, to be honest. I like what it represents for us, a lot, but the toughness pump that it provides is, as these effects go, actually kind of small for 5 mana. The Vigilance is really what makes me think we could almost keep it, but as it turns out, this deck doesn't actually have all that much difficulty with defending even when it's attacking. I mean, our commander has Vigilance, but more importantly, our commander is often helping us turn out 2 or 3 creatures every single turn. So we kinda already have a good defense just by the sheer accident of playing so many creatures on every turn. If you love this card and want to keep it, I really won't blame you. If it cost less mana, I'd have definitely kept it for sure. But as it stands, I didn't really find it that necessary. In fact, I hinted at this earlier when I said that we didn't need the Towering Titan's Trample, but the same reasoning actually applies here for our defenses too. Look at our Wrath spells, y'all. Every one of our board wipes is one-sided. We don't need Trample because we can clear the battlefield so brutally. We don't really need the extra vigilant backup defense as desperately as other creature-based aggros might either, because our board wipes are so numerous and so scale-tipping. So all in all, that's kind of why these 2 enchantments didn't make the cut for me. But, you know, there is an enchantment I am looking forward to getting into this deck, and that's the card Angelic Shield. It's a simple thing, but this is a 2-mana anthem. That's really nice, but the second line of text is what really grabs my attention and just won't let go. I know it doesn't sound like much, but returning a creature to our hand is actually kinda huge. Arcades is so central to this deck strategy that he will have the absolute biggest target on his back every single second. An anthem that can let us rescue him from removal is big. Like, really big. We don't want to have to cast him for 8 mana later. But it's also really cool to just bounce one of our defenders too. If we've stalled out by drawing too many lands or something, and we can't find another defender to cast so that Arcades will draw us a card, we can just bounce back one that we already have in play for a second shot. Sometimes one card is really all we need to just find one more defender, which will draw us another card to find another defender, and then another, and another. Commanders with these kinds of card draw rewards on them can really snowball like that. So this little anthem that can save our commander and maybe give us a little extra push in case of emergency, God, I just love it. Okay, our mortar is mixed, so let's move to part 2 and start laying some bricks. So I was searching for a nice way to phrase this, but y'all, some of these defenders are a hot mess, but it's okay. We're going to fix that. And one of the most important ways we're going to do this is by applying a lens I've already mentioned a couple of times, and that is by honoring a lower mana curve. Whether you believe that defense is the best offense or offense is the best defense, there's only one thing that matters for our purposes here. Arcades is an aggro deck. This is a deck where we are repeatedly casting creatures that are effectively 2 mana 5/5s that draw us a card. I'm gonna repeat that because I really wanted to hit home. We are repeatedly casting 2 mana 5/5s that draw us a card. I think a great point of comparison for Arcades strategy is the efficiency that we find in commanders like Joyra, SRAM, or Tuvasa. These commanders also draw cards for their payoffs, and as a result, the cards played in their decks prioritize low mana costs to make that payoff as easy as possible to acquire. The same will be true for us with Arcades. When our curve is low, we can stack multiple defenders in a single turn, packing the board with creatures without losing any card advantage at all. And in case it hasn't become clear for the uninitiated, these defenders are genuinely amazing in combat. Like, I think it's easy for people to ignore that if they aren't familiar with how this deck plays out and haven't played a lot against decks that use toughness in this way. But like, if this is the board that the Arcades player has assembled, they're able to clock someone for like half their life total. And this board right here, they could have played all of those in one turn. That is the level of cheap and efficient creatures we're dealing with. Like I said, is an aggro deck. Now, this is a lot of preamble before I actually get to cutting and adding any creatures, but I feel like this context is really necessary for the swaps I'm making. This is also why I actually want to get not just cheaper defenders into the deck, but also more defenders total. The more of them we have, the less likely we are to run out of steam. So, alright, I'm going to begin with 3 of the biggest cuts: Geist of the Archives, Wall of Frost, and Tree of Redemption. On their face, these all look like excellent cards with Arcades, and indeed, none of them are bad cards. But as we've established, they are high for our mana curve in this deck. The 2 most important factors in deciding which defenders we should use are A, their mana cost, and B, their utility. Their actual toughness is honestly almost inconsequential. We want more bodies on the field, because more bodies means we're drawing more cards. And if their mana cost is a little high, their ability had better be breathtaking. And unfortunately, I don't think these 3 cards hit either of those marks, so I'm swapping all 3 for some 1 mana defenders. Geist's Scry ability isn't worth the extra 2 mana we have to pay when we could play a Steel Wall instead. It's a 1 mana 4/4 that draws us a card. 1 mana 4/4 that draws us a card. Wall of Frost isn't anything special either, and I'm swapping it for Portcullis Vine. Like I mentioned with the Angelic Shield earlier, 1 extra card can be significant in a deck that chains so many spells in a single turn. But I also just like it if a Wrath ends up coming our way and we want to cash something in to draw a card and help refill before we go. But also, yeah, it's 1 mana to draw cards. I'm in. Now, Tree of Redemption I know looks really saucy, but it's gonna get chump blocked to heck. I'm gonna swap it for a 1 mana card that needs to be in here like yesterday, and that's Resolute Watchdog. He protect, and in this deck, he also attack. This good boy can keep our commander protected, which we need very much in a deck that relies this heavily upon its commander. I'm gonna cut 2 non-creature cards in this section too, because they're posing as creatures, but they're not really all that great at it. Teo and Birth of Meletis are just funky. Teo at 3 mana isn't interesting even if he can make 2 walls over a couple of turns. There's just not a lot of targeted player effects out there that Arcades will need to worry about, and the mana cost is kinda eh. And Birth of Meletis is also just kind of slow. In terms of replacements, I was originally tempted to stuff these 3 magnificent defenders into the deck. 2 mana 5/5s, you gotta love it. But I actually found the deck didn't have room for them. Like seriously, look through these creatures again. So many of them offer tons of power at such a low cost. Some add extra mana for us. The few that do have higher mana costs help us draw extra cards or will stay the hand of enemy creatures. Some pump the team, some have flash. There's just a lot of great utility happening here. And that's something I want to keep in mind when I'm adding in walls to replace the white cards we just cut. The first is Angelic Wall, and the second is Wall of Shards. Neither of these is extraordinarily exciting, but they each provide a flexibility I did think was missing from our current lineup, and that's simply the word flying. We didn't have a ton of air barriers before, and we can make great use of some aerial defenders. Now, the Wall of Shards has a cumulative upkeep that might seem off-putting at first, but this is a 2-mana flying 8/8 that draws us a card. I will pay the upkeep costs for several turns if it means I get to have a 2-mana flying 8/8 that draws me a card. Last but absolutely not least are 2 cards whose exclusion from the average deck makes my brain hurt. Like, get these in here stat. Wall of Glare is a 2-mana 5/5 that can take on an entire army by itself. Opponents had better have trample if they're going to try coming for us. This thing is so good at soaking up any possibility of an opponent thinking they'll peck at us for incidental damage. This card's awesome. And for the last one, holy crap, put Orator of Ojutai into your Arcades deck. I am begging you. This is literally one of the best defenders you can put into the deck. It flies, our commander is a dragon, so we'll draw 2 cards from it. This card's amazing here. Alright, that's it for my ads, but before we go, I'm going to throw out a couple of honorable mentions for cards you should also look to include if you upgrade this deck with slightly more expensive cards. Did you see that there was an Eerie Interlude in the main deck? This is high-key one of the best cards in the entire list. Why? Because Arcades is an enter the battlefield trigger, not a cast trigger. This blink spell will save the entire army from a wrath, but also will draw us 5+ cards when we do. So if you're gonna add extra stuff in, I highly recommend Eerie Interlude's more expensive cousin, Ghostway, as well as the new Cosmic Intervention from one of the Call Time precons. Save the board, draw a bazillion cards. And if you have a mnemonic wall in play when you cast them, you'll even get the spell back. Alright, that ought to do it for us. A link to the list can be found in the description box below, with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope you've had a great time at Arcades Arcade, and if you have any other recommendations you'd like to share with your fellow defenders, make sure you leave those suggestions in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.